Welcome to the Woman Who Rubs the Mountain podcast, a gathering place for conversations and stories of ecological embodiment. I am your host and guide, Kendra Ward. Our explorations begin with this single question. What happens when we rub on the body of the earth? How does it brush back against us? Here we seek an intimacy with the land and beings where we live, an intimacy that transcends language, culture, species, even consciousness. Let us come together in creative, strange, disruptive ways of relating beyond the human-centric limitations of our current dreaming. By sharing experiences of embodied ecology, our reality shifts, our core truths sharpen, and space is made for a new, old, earth-honoring culture to reemerge. So I am so very honored and excited to be in conversation today with a dear teacher of mine, Lorie Dechar. And I am so excited to read your juicy bio, Lorie. So here we go. Lorie Dechar is an acupuncturist, consciousness explorer, and change maker, committed to bringing the art of alchemy and soul healing back to the modern world. Hallelujah. She has practiced Chinese medicine for 4 decades and is the author of 5 Spirits, Alchemical Acupuncture for Psychological and Spiritual Healing, Kigo, exploring the spiritual essence of acupuncture points through the changing seasons, and her most recently published book, The Alchemy of Inner Work, a guide for turning illness and suffering into true health and well-being. With her husband, astrologer and community builder Benjamin Fox, she co-founded A New Possibility, a global healing and learning community committed to the belief that inner work is a prerequisite to any lasting outer change. And I have all of these books. They are absolute staples for me, essential guideposts. And one of the things that I love most about your work, Lorie, is your willingness to explore sort of what I think of as the black beating shamanic heart of this medicine, to approach every acupuncture point as a portal of consciousness, stripped of protocols and like the way we want to over categorize everything and box everything up. And I just really love that. So I'm so grateful for you being in conversation with me today. So welcome.
Thank you, Kendra. Thank you so much. And I'm very grateful for your presence in our life and in our community and on our planet, and for your beautiful book, for your commitment to so many of the healing projects that are central and have been central, for me for 4 decades and more, probably since I was actually first found myself on this crazy planet and was like, what are we up to here? I feel like we're kind of soul collaborators on that.
Definitely. I hear you. Yes, thank you. Well, I'm so curious to know how you're put in place by where you live, and just curious about some of the strange gods and forces and elements and directions that put you in place there. So yeah, do tell.
Well, place now I think is such an interesting question, because right now, as I speak with you, I am sitting in my sort of refuge space, which is my office in our little house in East Blue Hill on the coast of Maine, which is where I've written a lot of the books. Not all the writing happens here, but a lot happens here. And it happens for me out of my deep connection to this land and to this coastline and to the little islands that I kayak out to. And I'm aware that this land isn't ours. That's very present for me. The stewards of this land were Passamaquoddy Indians, Wabanaki, and they had a confederacy called the People of the First Light, the Dawnland Confederacy. So the various tribes here were part of that confederacy. And of course, we're down east. We are actually the first light on the continent here of America. I think it extends a bit further out in Canada, but the sun first hits the United States of America just a bit further up the coast, the people of the dawn.
That's so cool. But
it's kind of incredible, right? Because these people who were stewards of this land understood that. The dawn land.
Yeah, I did not take that for granted.
Yeah. And ever since I've been really young, really little, I've had this deep sense that we are living on the lands of others who've walked, who've had their roots. I grew up on the North Shore of Long Island, which at the time when I was growing up was still a bit wild. And my older brother, I remember, he'd go up into the woods behind our house, and he found in arrowheads. I still have a carved arrowhead from those woods. And I think there's always been this sense of we need to somehow honor, but also heal and find our way back through the violence and through the loss. I'm aware of it here where I live because the spirits of this land are very, very real to me. And they, I dedicated 5 spirits actually to the spirits of this land, because that was a book that was downloaded to me as I was kayaking and through the seasons. And the same with Kigo. Every point in Kigo was I went out during that season of that element and sat by the cove and sat by the quarries and sat in the forest. And each point for me was connected to place. The body of place, as well as our bodies, which are bodies of place. And I do feel that there's so much more healing that needs to be done, even here in this little village, because I feel the presence of others that lived here before. Yeah.
Well, I'm curious if you have any other stories or just anything else you wanted to share that relates to creating a sense of intimate and embodied connection. I think I'm kind of like ongoingly on this search for that sense of haptic wisdom, like that relating to touch, and that sense of like rubbing on the place where we are, and it feels like a challenge to tune into the ecological embodiment aspect of things. So I'm just curious if you have any thoughts about that.
Well, it's interesting because of course I do. I have things arise in me at the same time that I feel I also want to honor that we are at the very same time that we are knowing that we're called to a deep, as you say, sensory spiritualized, somatic reconnecting to Earth, to Gaia. There's also, I'm aware of this other kind of rhizomatic network that's also palpable, that's happening, between you and me right now. I look at you and I see, and your Shen is touching my heart through this whole other, as I say, kind of a web, or I think of rhizomes, or I think of kind of the tendrils under the earth, that we are also building this global web of lovers, really.
Wow. A global web of lovers.
Love it. And I feel so, as say to Benjamin, my husband and partner and alchemical challenger and whatever he is, but I'll say, our work is in the midst of the breakdown to continue to cultivate these community connections, our gardens, the people who grow some of our food, our bakers, on the very, very intimate communal level, and at the same time, continue to cultivate these amazing global communities that are forming all over the planet. So I feel like, where I live is both very specific to this little garden, this little place, this little beach, this rock that looks like an eagle, that has an eye that looks back at me when I sit there. And then this vast, amazing array of people that I love all over the planet and really have deep connection with, in Chicago, in New Mexico, in Canada, in India, in Europe, in Africa. Like, we are all of this connecting link that is forming. So the question of the palpability of it, I think it's that mesh, that network is also an extension of my nervous system now. And I do continually come back to, like, Zoom that's our training wheels, for this extended nervous system of virtual heart connection that's happening. But then at the same time, coming down to your question of, how do we deeply inform who we are through our connection, our sensory connection to her, to that, the rubbing the mountain, rubbing the earth. One story that comes to me whenever I come here is when I was writing 5 Spirits. And I came to writing about the Yi, the spirit of the earth, which, for those of you who aren't familiar, the Yi, and the character in Chinese, is a picture of a heart with a musical note above it. And it's speaking of that aspect of our being that creates our intentionality, our dedication to what we're up to. Sometimes I talk about the Yi as the prosperous farmer who goes out every day. She puts her boots on, rain or shine, tends the garden day after day. There's a kind of humble, ongoing devotion that has to do with this particular aspect of the soul that gets things, that moves things from idea, from vision, from possibility to manifestation, to formation, to beingness. But when I was writing about the Yi, I was like, I don't quite get what they were talking about. What were they talking about? And it was late summer, which is the season of earth, the season of the Yi. It's when things come to fruition, ripening. And I kayaked out to this little island that I love called Darling. Its real name is Darling, right?
Oh my gosh.
So I kayaked out to Darling and I'm like, okay, come on now, like, what do you have to tell me about this? And I got my kayak up on the shore and I sat on this warm, sun-warmed rock And I looked out at the sea lavender, which grows, the sea lavender grows between the high tide and the low tide line. Needs the wash of salt water, and then it needs the sun and the low tide, to breathe. And it was full of blossoms, and the blossoms were covered with these honeybees. They were just covered with honeybees. And at that moment, I got it. I got like, oh, that's that these honeybees every year after year, that the blossoms come on the sea lavender at this time. And it's recurrent coming back. And then the honeybees come just at that time to gather the nectar to make the honey that they need to survive. And somehow for me, that was the essence of this. And it was just a very clear transmission not from above, but really from her, from below, a transmission from the earth spirit. And, that's it for me. That's our work, whether we're touching the body with a needle, or whether we're gardening, or whether we're looking to see what Gaia is asking of us now. It's coming from that kind. And I know that's your devotion as well, to listen like that.
Yeah. That I love the way your story, like the way it spiraled full circle, to, the transmission organically appearing, being available by that deep sense of presence. So that's beautiful. Now I have to look up sea lavender to get
right.
Get an image.
Well, you're not coastal,
I know.
right?
Yeah,
so
right.
Yes. And it's very specific. It's like late summers, our time. We bloom, mid-August, like just as the days are getting shorter, and the light shifting, and then these purple blossoms start coming. Yeah.
Beautiful.
And that kind of is where, for me at this point, if we're going to have faith to get us through, these times of extreme transformation and turbulence, I so am on the same page as you with that it's our rootedness in place, but place being both local and global.
Yeah, it's such a essential point for sure. So I wanted to just, for anyone who is not familiar with the term alchemical healing, because it's such the crux of your work, Lorie, wondering if you could give a brief description of what that means to you, and also as it relates to what Gaia is asking of us at this time as well.
Yeah. Well, it took me quite a while to say, okay, I'm actually going to take that word, alchemy. And, I never would say take ownership, because it's a word that's for everyone. But I guess to actually almost like formally say, okay, I'm married to you now. Like I know that many people are married to you, but I'm having a sacred marriage with alchemy, and I'm going to make that public. Because it was a big decision, because there's so many ways that alchemy is viewed or misviewed or misunderstood. And certainly, we're taught in high school, I'm sure they're still teaching that it was misguided chemistry and these crazy people who thought they could turn lead into gold, and completely missing that the alchemical traditions that we find in China, that we find in Vedic medicine, in yoga, in the Kabbalah, in European mystical traditions, that this was a many, many centuries long, thousands of years of investigation. you can say, its own kind of epistemology, a system of knowing that I've come to see as kind of spanning the time between the shamanic traditions, the more tribal, nomadic, not necessarily documented in written form. Like shamanic tradition was a more verbal lineage song transmission. It was tribal. It was often not localized or permanently localized in a space, or it might be, but there was a lot of nomadic aspects to it. When people started to settle down and begin to document, record in written form or in symbolic form their observations, there was a shifting. And for me, that was the beginning of a more alchemical tradition. Like we say, alchemy happens in a laboratory as opposed to just out there in connection with nature. The dates, I mean, you could say ancient Egypt, you could say, there's all kinds of ways that people date when it began, but it was more like a consciousness shift. So alchemy, I would say, spans the time of the waning of shamanic traditions and then the rising of what we call modern Western medicine. It's a long time. And so it's a big tradition. And the basic distinction between, you could say, alchemy and modern science or modern chemistry was that the alchemists didn't separate spirit and matter. It was before that kind of dualistic splitting apart of domains. So alchemists, when they're talking about transformational process, the reason that an alchemist could say transformation doesn't necessarily lead to an entropic loss of energy is because we can infuse a system with spirit. So to make that more real, we could say the difference between a person who's living a life in a simply material way, where spirit's up there and far away. We could say we begin with a certain amount of life force chi when we're born, and basically through life it runs down, and then we get old and people say, oh yeah, I'm getting old, I'm getting decrepit, and I'm dying because I've lost my chi. But the alchemists were saying, no, the other possibility is that we work with the soul forces. We continually infuse ourselves with the soul forces. And it's not that we don't age, but actually through that aging process, there are losses, but there are also gains. So the idea of the sage or the wisdom holder or the elder from an alchemical perspective is someone who's continually transforming what we say in Chinese medicine, their jing, their life force, so that it's not just being used up, you could say, that this is a negentropic way of being. So finally, I'm like, yeah, I'm gonna take it on and talk about healing from that perspective. That we're not just saying we're going to fix a symptom so a person can go back to where they are and keep using up their jing, but actually that each encounter with a symptom or a difficulty or even a planetary disruption can be viewed from through the lens of alchemical healing as an invitation to transform. Yeah.
That's that pithy, getting to the core of it.
Yes, right? That's the thing. That's the core. That if I were going to say, what's the mission of alchemical healing work that is, at the core of our community, of most of us engaged in this community, of a new possibility, of your work, of the of the work that's going on in the world. The idea is that we take what looks really bad, really difficult, really hard, and we say, okay, what, this is the lead. This is the alchemists use the word prima materia, the junk, the stuff. This is what we've got. How do we infuse it with a kind of awareness, with a care, with a practice that can actually discover the gold that's within? Yeah. So beautiful. That's the work. That's the essence of my teaching, both to practitioners, but also to people in general, offering that the alchemy of inner work. Our book is we hope we meant it to be a practical guide. Here's some how-tos, some things you can actually do to begin to, well, I would say, to work with neg entropy in your life, to work with actually transforming. And, even though the title, Transforming Illness and Suffering into True Health and Well-Being, I mean, it's hard to say we're going to have true health and well-being on a planet that's suffering and in so much disarray. But how can we be our most healthy? How can we be our most skillful here?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So a question comes to mind, an awareness. It feels related to what you just said. I've been observing in myself, and I'm wondering if others are noticing this too, this propensity to continually want to slip into a thinking of when things just improve, when things lighten up, when things get easier, there's still this sliver that just is having trouble adjusting to the current reality. So just purposely bringing myself to this thought of what if this intensity, this heaviness is there the rest of my life, and really continuing to ask that question over and over again. And I think that we could take this discourse to the idea of climate change as well. So how does the shape of grief form in me, accepting that these harms to the planet don't stop, in this way in my life, and how will I live in my body, not grasping for some way out, something else. So just hoping you could speak.
I really appreciate you speaking that, Kendra, because I as you know, I mean, we've had other conversations, and I feel it's very important for those words to be spoken, that, it's not about, okay, how are we going to come up with some plan to fix this? Because I think at this point, it's gotten bigger than what our rational minds or our present consciousness, our dualistic, rational thinking, mental consciousness, this has gone beyond. The scope of the complexity of the challenge is really asking us to step into a completely different consciousness, which is not, and I don't want to get too far out here, but my sense of the invitation is that we really step beyond even thinking in time as we know it, like it could get better, or in 30 years it will look like this. We don't know what it's going to look like. And we don't even know what the possible vectors of good, of positive intervention may be. So I think what I would say in response to your question is that what I've learned, and I sense we're on the same page with this, that if we begin to honor the earth spirits, if we begin to look at an embodied kind of divinity rather than some up there, out there savior that's going to come along and somehow fix this mess. Mm-hmm. Our work is to then begin to learn to navigate and to find refuge and I'm not even going to use the word stability, to learn to navigate within turbulence.
Yeah.
And I think the way that we do that is, as you've said, by descending, by being willing to bear certain kinds of dismemberment of our sense of the reality, even of our sense of, what we can expect, what we can plan. And that's really big. That's a really big ask for us humans.
Yeah, it sure is. I find it is a forgetting and remembering. I mean, there's so much that takes that spiral dance, but I find within myself, it's just that repeating, forgetting and remembering of that.
Yes. And offering each other the tools and the skills that we're each learning along the way. We're like, I think, as we're almost stepping into this terrain, like, okay, how do we live in turbulence? How do we live in uncertainty? How do we do that? And there's a lot. I think that's another reason why alchemy has been so important to me. One of the really central ideas in all the alchemical traditions is that chaos can be fertile. That in fact, any true transformation goes through a phase where everything dissolves. If we cannot somehow bear that dissolution, then we're just going to keep running back to these old, encrusted, rigid structures that are killing us and killing the planet.
Yeah.
So the people that I, want to hang out with, that I want to listen to, that I want to converse with, like this conversation, but, other wonderful people who are having these conversations are really looking at how do we do this differently? Without resorting to blame, hatred. Okay, everyone else has got an AK-47. Maybe I've got to get an AK-47. I mean, that's very, a kind of thinking, a kind of being that we can say, okay, that's present on the planet, but I'm going to consciously choose not to participate in that particular vibration. And, Bayo, and I know Bayo Akomolafe's work, and I know he's one of my guides in this lifetime, and I cherish his being. One of the things he threw out at a meeting that I was at was, he said, what if we shift our whole way of being and say, death is not the enemy? What if we say death is safe? And that so resonated for me because of all the work that, as I've done around not understanding, but honoring the domain of the dark goddess, the domain of Shiva, of Zhiwang Mu, of Pele, of these potent underworld, goddesses of the depths, who, are the ones who are, hold dominion over life, death, and rebirth. And, I feel that she is the one who's been the most marginalized and demonized by mental consciousness, or if we're going to use the word patriarchal systems, because she is ultimately the one who has the ultimate power.
Yeah.
Because no matter how much money we accumulate and how much, how many corporations we run and how many institutions we control, at the end of the day, death waits for each of us. She is the one, we end our lives in her arms. So that holding that, what Bayo said, and holding my reverence for that dark goddess as kind of the guide and the deity that we most need to honor right now, it allows a certain breathing room. As difficult as it is to open to it. Yeah.
That's a really, like just your choice of words there feels really potent. Even those words of it allows a certain breathing room feels like it's like pushing, I don't know, I get this sense of edginess, like this sense of feeling into pushing back on the structures and the boundaries. And it just feels particularly like I could sit with those words for quite a while.
Even what you're saying, it's sort of, for me anyway, because I spent so many years of my life, all my 20s, and okay, we got to fix this. We got to fix this. We've got to shut down the nuclear power plants. We've got to so much pressure. And, even becoming a practitioner of Chinese medicine, it's like, okay, we've got to do this healing. We've got to get this new content. And finally, now being able to say, we're part of much larger process here.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And, knowing that I think is what allows me to go on, really, to not give up hope.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Just that the continued memory of time frames that are not understandable to our human minds, that there's much more beyond what is right here in front of us. So and just the continued, this embracing of our homelessness, the ways in which we're a bit lost, but also that is, I don't know if maybe it is what's required in this moment. So I'm feeling into Bayo's, the term Bayo Akomolafe and others have, I hear this term of fugitivity just circling around frequently. And I'm curious, how you relate to this word, how, especially in the sense of like choosing to not participate in the systems as they are, becoming a fugitive from these systems. And just wondering what that means to you.
I love that you brought that word into our conversation. I have a lot of resonance to the idea of fugitivity. I think we just take a minute with that.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. At the root of all of the work that I've been doing for the past decades and decades, and moving forward now, I've just entered my 70s. So I just turned 70. So I'm like, okay, I'm looking at this, time has a very different quality. What do I want to do with these years now? So, I'm still in the treatment room. I a little bit, because I have to have my hands on the needles, and a lot of my work is virtual. But if I think, okay, where's my heart's desire as far as what I'm up to? And it really is, at this point, being part of midwifing, what I see as a new way of being human. a new way. I wouldn't even say being human, a new way of being. And, that there is a consciousness that is non-dual, that is multidimensional, that is atemporal, that really sees, not just talks about, but is living in a world where spirit and matter are truly again intertwined, that the diaphaneity of matter becomes real to us. And that has been an organizing principle for me. The passion I feel for Chinese medicine isn't about, it's wonderful to alleviate pain. It's wonderful to support, turning a baby that's transverse. There's so many exciting things we can do with alternative medicine, with needles, with all the work. But the real key passion for me is about how it messes with our minds and opens us to the reality that we are energy beings. You feel chi move through you, and you're like, oh, wait a minute. That transforms a person.
Yeah.
And then that begins to open us to a very different way of being. So, whatever we call this new consciousness that, it's bubbling up all over, in these questions about gender, and these questions about, rhizomatic connections, in these questions about who are we as, brown, black, white, what does that even mean anymore? So many things that are being called into question, even as there's this extreme pullback to a fundamentalist, regressive, kind of institutionalizing of, whether you call it, white supremacy or patriarchy, but underneath there's this rising up, a kind of emergent consciousness. And I feel like that is my work. So what I think I'm beginning to understand for myself about fugitivity is that it's a matter of leaving the plantation of modernity, of colonialism, of patriarchal consciousness, which really has enslaved us in a certain way. But that leaving that place is not easy. It's not simple. It takes the same kind of courage, the same real willingness to let go of what is familiar and step into a new land, a different way of being. And it's a moment to moment thing. As I said earlier, it means not getting caught up in the dualistic, those people over there are the enemy, or it's this person's fault, or if I do it this way, this familiar way. It means really being able to travel in a different land, moment to moment, and cultivating those kinds of connections, those communities, where we can have these conversations as fugitives from a system that really is killing us, that's killing us and killing the planet. And I think in a way, coming full circle, that to me is what alchemical healing is all about now.
Yeah, pulling it back in. I have the sense, as you were speaking, of like pathways, almost like highways. And when you're talking about the emergence quality, I had this sense of almost the way that mushrooms like just emerge out of nowhere, and like it pushes everything else in its path away. And just, had this image in my mind as you were speaking that was really potent. So
I just want to say I love that image because it brings us back to the earlier conversation about our somatic connection to the earth as a way of moving now.
Yeah.
Rubbing the mountain, throwing thunder.
Well, Lorie, do you have any particular events or teachings or anything else coming up that you wanted to tell everyone about, or maybe just speaking to what the New Possibility community is? You've hinted on what it's about for sure, but just wanted to give you an opportunity to speak to that a little bit more.
Thanks, Kendra. Yeah. I mean, I am very committed to continuing. We are currently in the midst of a mentorship for practitioners. It's very exciting. So continuing to support healers in learning the tools to support people, humans, in living differently for themselves and in relationship to the earth. Mm-hmm. And moving through turbulence in skillful ways. So that's a big piece of my work. I am engaged in a writing project again that I'm kind of excited about, working with, focused on a number of different things, including field dynamics in therapeutic environments, but also the po-soul, which is the body soul, and bringing the po-soul back to her proper place as one of our deities, one of the places where spirit lives in the body. And then, of course, as you know, Benjamin and I cultivate, hold, we garden a new possibility, which is our community. And we love people coming in. We love welcoming new people to that community. So if anyone out there listening is touched or wants more or would like to join our conversations and find out more. And Kendra, we love your presence in that community. So I feel like we are kind of co-inspiring each other, but we welcome more. We welcome more searchers and people looking for different ways of being. It's a newpossibility.com. Please take a look. Let us know if there's any reason why you're feeling you can't join, whether it's financial or for any other reason. Contact us, because anyone who wants to be in it, we want you there. So that's our community, and it's a pretty dynamic platform of people willing to live on the edge and talk about what's real. And how to live skillfully within these realities.
Yeah, I would say that just the level of support in navigating and having like feeling into the complexity and the intelligence of our hearts, like just fantastic conversations about everything that's happening so that we feel just a little bit more cracked open. Like that was an experience I had recently where there was something that had been happening and I realized I couldn't go there. And in meeting with the community, there was like, by the end, I could feel how I was cracked open enough to start to, because at different times in the week or in the day or in our lives, we're moving between boundaries and feelings and our ability in that moment to feel what we can feel. And I just this happened really recently, that experience of just being cracked open in a supported, loving environment, is just so needed at this time. So,
and, to just kind of add to what you just said, and maybe as a way to wrap up our whole conversation, is that it's clear to me that none of us can do this alone.
Yeah.
We're not meant to do this alone. The era of the hero's journey who does it alone, with his sword, gung-ho, slay the dragon. And that was important. And it's still an archetype that lives in us. But I feel like the emergent archetype is one of individuals with their own particularity in community.
Yeah.
And those communities are sprouting up, as you say, like mushrooms out of this underlying Gaia intelligence, because I do believe this is what she's asking of us, to learn to live differently, including to live within communities.
Yes.
Human and more than human.
Exactly. Yeah.
That we are entangled.
Yes. Yes. Well, thank you so much, Lorie, for all of it, for how you're spending your life's energy, and just that this so many patients, and through your mentoring and your teaching. I mean, just there's so many lives that you continue to change and touch and love on. So I'm so grateful for this conversation. And
well, me too, Kendra, because what a treat to just hang out with you.
Yeah.
I loved it.
Yeah.
We'll do it again.
That sounds great. Well, thank you, everyone. So much gratitude to everyone listening, and just for spending your time with us, and for being willing to sit in the trouble with us, for being willing to struggle against your edges a bit as we find new ways of submerging ourselves in this great wild earth, our love for this great wild earth. So bye for now.